you understand that 80% of the activities you took part in, you can't justify morally and legally. And that's the moment you just freeze and you don't know what to do with yourself. That's the moment that some of us decided to break the silence, to try to scream about what we took part in.
It doesn't matter from which part of society you are, from what side of this argument you're on. You have to deal with this. Your son is going to be there. Your son is going to abuse people, children, women. He's going to do that.
In this moment,
now
it's being
he's
done
doing
in your
this.
name.
Now he's doing this. Now you are doing this. A 19-year-old who's your messenger. He's not there for his fun. He's not there because he wants to be there. He's there because you sent him. And society has to know what I did. They have to take their responsibility. And if 300 guys like me are coming to the world and saying, the best sons and daughters of the Israeli society, saying we are corrupt, we did corrupt things, we were part of a corrupt reality, this is something that can't be ignored. This is something that you can't say, well, exceptionals. It's not exceptionals. This is the reality.
The mainstream looks at all these stories as exceptional, as some specific soldier who comes from a bad social, economical background that freaked out from the harsh reality that he's in his service, that it's not exceptional. It's our old generation who took part in this reality, did the same, I would say, immoral and sometimes illegal actions.
How can you talk to me about purity of our force when this is what we do?
Platoon officer that is, I don't know, 24 years old, rules the lives of 10,000 Palestinians in Hebron.
So what does he carry for the rest of his life, this kid? Why do you think soldiers come home from the army on a Friday night and get drunk?
You see a process of growing and growing and growing fanaticism in terms of justification of violent actions, not caring the least bit about human rights of anyone who you don't happen to like, especially if they happen to be Palestinian. So it's alright to kill them when they're young.
And people that are doing this are us. It's 19, 20-year-old kids playing around. Until the age of 18, they played around with video games and computer games, and now they're doing the real thing. But only now there are consequences. There are real people that are being abused, that are being shot and killed. It's not a game anymore. People have scars in their minds, in their souls, in their hearts. You can't be sensitive to people after for 3 years you were a monster and your whole role was to destroy people's lives. And that's exactly the bubble we're trying to burst. We're trying to tell Israeli public, wake up. This is a wake-up call.
What we have to do is to change the attitude completely. This is only a small symptom of the basic disease. The basic disease is the war.
We're complicit with all this when we use violence. Justify it, teach it, sell it, promote it. All the privilege is maintained with violence. Anti-Semitism is a disease that has plagued many societies, and the answer to that is for people of intelligence and goodwill to be fighting it, but not to give Jews extra privilege, certainly not to allow them to take anyone else's land, but to establish their place in society as with every minority.
It's a matter of bringing up a generation that will first of all be very violent, and that is used to seeing blood, and that is used to have no honor to people, to go in the middle of the night, to get up people out of their beds, to frighten children, to behave to a whole nation as if they were not human. Those are the people who will be the future Israeli citizens.
I could imagine working as a rabbi in a community where basic commitment to the values that I speak of as Jewish values would be the organizing principle. Right now, Judaism in Israel is one of the best arguments against religion, of course, because it's been so tainted with nationalism.
There is very little sympathy for the suffering of Palestinians, which is done in the name of Israelis' security. And then in this atmosphere to say, well, it's not justified, right? Collective punishment, even if there is a security benefit. I mean, I would also say there is no security benefit or real long-term security benefit. But even if there is a benefit, you can't torture people. You can't demolish the homes of innocent people. It's a very difficult message to get across to the Israeli public.
The Fourth Geneva Convention states that an occupying power cannot destroy personal property. Since 1967, as state policy, Israel has demolished over 18,000 Palestinian homes, leaving families homeless and traumatized.
I would say that a commitment to human rights should include an awareness of the other as a human being. And that's something that most Israeli Jews are not raised to have.
Israelis are quite hostile to human rights, which they see as Palestinian rights.
After the two world wars, Europe understood that they have to change the strategy from power to reconciliation, that they have to stop having colonies out of their countries, and it's an end to imperialism. Now Israel, I think, is the last one in the world who is doing exactly the opposite. Colonialism in occupied territories and depressing the natives.
Colonialism demands making the native population invisible. That hasn't worked for Zionism. The Palestinians are visible. It's because of media, internet, CNN, etc.
I think that we have to educate people to ask questions, to doubt things, to believe that there are different ways to solve problems, and they give only one way. They dictate one way, and it's a problem.
The comparison with apartheid arouses antagonism on the part of Israeli society, and they are quick to point out all of the differences, but it's clear that you have certain policies that I think the apartheid analogy is accurate. You have roads in the West Bank that are off limits to Palestinians, are basically Jews-only roads. That has very clear echoes of apartheid policy. Apartheid is a separation based on discrimination.
Beautiful new roads where a Palestinian cannot drive. If he drives, they take away his car. And when I asked them, why don't you put a sign that it's only for Jews? So they told me that if I want an anti-Semitic journalist will take a picture of the sign. So they don't put a sign, but nevertheless they don't let the Palestinians to go on to drive on those roads.
And they cage them in onto those fences as if they were animals. And that's how the people are blocked. They can't go onto this apartheid road. It's only for the sacred Jews.
In the state of Israel proper, under the Israeli jurisdiction, we have Arabs, Muslims and Christians and Druze, and it's a shame to say that they don't really have equal rights.
In Israel's democracy, only the Jewish majority enjoy full democratic rights. Non-Jewish Israelis experience unequal judicial rights and limited freedom of speech, assembly, and the press. Palestinians inside Gaza and the West Bank under occupation have no rights at all.
Sharon would give them a state tomorrow, but it's a prison state. It's a Bantustan, to use the concept that came out of South Africa during the apartheid time, trying to shove the Palestinians into a mini-state of 5 or so islands where Israel controls the movement, the economy, the water, the agriculture, the airspace, Jerusalem, the borders. In other words, it's really a prison state, but they can get a state. So from our point of view, one of the issues isn't only sovereignty in a state, but its viability. I think in a way the Israeli public is very much like the European population was in South Africa in the last days of apartheid, when the international pressures were such that finally de Klerk came to the European population and said, it's over. We can't sustain apartheid anymore. We have to go to black majority rule. I mean, there was a lot of grumbling, but it went through.
If Israelis, if they will be sanctioned as opposed to rewarded with incredible amounts of financial aid and military aid, then I can see them deciding to adhere to international law.
Well, virtually all my life I've been involved with groups dealing with coexistence, both in South Africa and in Israel. So all the work that we are doing in our group is geared towards a long-term reconciliation process, very, very much also inspired by what happened in South Africa. Because after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was an ability to get on with it without any more violence, or political violence, put it that way. And I think that if this miracle of South Africa could work there, there is a way that through dialogue we can eventually get to this same way of dealing with the conflict. Look, if it's possible for me to sit in a room with a Palestinian, and both of us have lost children, and we understand the need for reconciliation and peace, then for God's sake, isn't it possible for other people? That's why we can spearhead a reconciliation process. Each of us in our own way, each of us has our own personal path to follow.
These 16 voices have chosen that path, working from different directions to forge a road to peace, universal human rights, and mutual understanding.
Either I could say, okay, I pack up and go home and forget about Israel, or you say, well, no, if I'm living here and retain values that I believe in, then a commitment to justice can also be applied here. We are a human rights organization which is looking only at human rights violations in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, which is most effective in monitoring our own government. And of course, our first responsibility is monitoring what Israel does and making sure that Israel is held to a human rights standard. We want our government to obey the law.
Yeah, I think Jewish existence is one of fear to a large extent. And that can only be overcome with optimism and with positive experience. Palestinians offer that to a large extent with their hospitality, and I hope that that'll be an experience that more Israeli Jews have, and more Jews from all over have. Sadly, most Israeli Jews don't have these experiences, don't even have a clue about the possibility of being welcome here.
I was getting more and more upset and decided I have to do something, and then I looked for for something, and I heard about Mahsom Watch. And I started standing every week in Jerusalem, in Kalandia. And then I met Dina shortly afterwards, and from there we saw that the checkpoints, standing in the checkpoints is very important.
I really believe that every Palestinian hates every Jew. And I was very much afraid of entering the occupied territories. With Mahsom Watch, when I started entering regularly the West Bank and seeing that the Palestinians, more than the Israelis, can distinguish between Israelis who are human rights people, anybody who wishes them well, and Israelis who are against them. I never actually encountered real hatred. I was really, really surprised how welcome I felt there.
And when we decided that it's not enough to be observers, though it's very important, and it's not enough to tell the people in Israel, even if they don't want to hear what is going on in the West Bank.
But we can go further, and that's what we're doing now with the Eshdin. The most important thing is happening in the villages, not only on the checkpoints, where their daily life is absolutely impossible. That's where they need the help.
They want to choke them in every way. No water, no clearing the garbage away, no roads, no hospitals, no school. They want to have them transferred from here, that's all.
Well, basically Daesh was formed after October 2000. It was the same idea of trying to promote or to construct this Arab-Jewish partnership within Israel and to work together.
I started bringing groups of Israelis and internationals to the territories on these alternative tours and showing them the situation on the ground and showing them the settlements, the refugee camps, the water. So we have to bring Israelis and internationals to demonstrate, to protest together with the Palestinians, and that way they won't be able to kill people every day. And that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years.
In October 1998, there was a convention which discussed militarism and enlistment in Israeli society. It was decided to call New Profile.
I think New Profile, a movement to demilitarize the Israeli mind, has been my growing house. We try to address as deeply and as extensively as we can questions that deal with basics of the militarization of the Israeli mind, literally.
It used to be that you could say that most Israelis serve in the army, and it would be basically true. General Americanization of Israel with greater emphasis on individualism and capitalism, and it became increasingly popular for people to avoid military service. They had a very vast interest in their refusal throughout the 90s. It just continued and continued. Every year the data say less and less people serve in the army, less and less people complete their military service. We're not talking about more than 44% of the population serving by now.
The light that we try to put on in Israeli society and breaking the silence is to really bring the stories of what happened, the reality of what happened in the occupied territories in the last 5 years of conflict, from the people who were there, from the soldiers who took part in this situation, from the soldiers who were active in this conflict.
Force the Israeli public to be aware of what is being done in its own backyard, just 15 minutes from here. A moral price that is being paid both on the Palestinian side, but both and our side.
As an organization, Gush Shalom is spread on a very wide front. Our central effort is to influence Israeli public opinion. Since 1993, we have made some 600 or 700 demonstrations and similar actions. Things on the ground, helping Palestinian farmers who could not pick their olives because of the settlers, build Palestinian homes destroyed by the Israeli army. My idea is, our job is to prepare public opinion. Once public opinion is prepared for something and really wants it, the political system will adapt itself in a democracy. If there's no leader, a leader will appear.
I came as a pioneering Zionist to build a new Jewish state, and I find myself today rebuilding the Palestinian house, which my Jewish state has demolished.
One of the things that we're trying to do in the peace movement is to keep the conflict political. As long as it's political, and you can identify the causes and the grievances and the reasons, and you can begin to work out a solution. Once you start making it, you start mystifying it. You say, this is terror, this is their mentality, this is the way they are, us and them, good and evil. Then you really take the whole conflict out of any kind of a rational approach. The only thing you can do is destroy it, or it destroys you. I mean, yesterday was communism, today it's Islam. If you happen to fall on the wrong side of the interests that are mystifying and that are demonizing and creating these kinds of paradigms, that you have no defense.
The Parents Circle was started in 1994 by Yitzhak Frankenthal, who is a religious Jew. After his son was captured and killed by the Hamas, he went on a different path. He was looking for a way to prevent other families from experiencing this. Then Israeli said, yes, it's all very well, you're looking for peace and reconciliation, but what about the Palestinians? And so we reached out to the Palestinians, and that's where the first meeting started. And then it grew and grew and grew, because there has to be a sense of hope. All sense of reconciliation has a rippling effect. And even though we are 500 families, we make a lot of noise for 500 families, because you touch something in somebody's heart when they meet you, and when they understand that you took this terrible pain and you transferred it into looking for reconciliation instead of hatred and violence and revenge. So, since October of 2002, we've had a telephone line between Palestinians and Israelis, and we've had 590,000 telephone calls between Palestinians and Israelis. Our leaders tell us there's no one to talk to. So surely that should be some sort of example that there is someone to talk to.
You can either be fanatical and hateful and unforgiving, or you have to understand the other side. We are the strong people. We are the first one to stretch out a hand.
It's like a kaleidoscope. If you turn a kaleidoscope, nothing changes actually. All the parts remain exactly as they were before, but they have a new pattern. And once you establish this new pattern, it remains in your mind.
The majority of Israelis and Palestinians today still support two states. I mean, theoretically, you could have, a federated state, a European Union type model, or a one state. You can't have first-class citizens and second-class citizens or occupied population. The most important thing is that everyone living here is a full and equal citizen of a state.
What shall I say? It's not the dream that I dreamed when I came here in the 1960s and thought of building a new society as part of a new world. I don't think we had an appreciation of the fact that it was costing another people a terrible price.
So the question really is, what do we all learn from the Holocaust? Jews would continue to say the Holocaust means never again should it happen to Jews. And others would say, or some Jews also would say, the Holocaust means never again.
As a Jew, I can't not think of the Holocaust. That God forbid this is the direction that things are going in. I can't not think, oh, this is how it happened. This is how people didn't know.
We are using our being victims as the greatest privilege. That's the horror.
Across generations, finding their way through historic suffering and personal sorrow, these voices have chosen to reject indoctrination and fear. They recognize the occupation's terrible cost to their democracy and society. They see clearly that the long-term security and viability of Israel depend upon real change from within. With compassion, understanding, and empathy, they look to internal values and voices to break the silence of denial. The voice of healing and transformation. Kol Tikkun Vishinui.